Voice of America and on Africa 54 continues to highlight the plight of African refugees and migrants, a subject that has caught the attention of key policymakers in the United States. And joining me in the studio is Catherine Wiesner, Deputy Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Population, Refugees, Migration at the U.S. Department of State. Catherine, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for keeping this topic on the spotlight. And let's talk about your recent trip to Africa and your perspective on what you saw on the ground. You visited Sudan, Somalia, and Kenya.
Sure, thank you. And maybe I'll start with just a brief overview of the situation writ large on the continent for refugees. I think I can say, to be brutally honest, that the situation of refugees in Africa, at least in terms of sheer numbers, is as bad as it has ever been. The number of refugees across the continent has risen to 4.8 million, and there are also almost 12 million people who are displaced internally within their countries. These are people who have been displaced from and within Mali, Central African Republic, South Sudan, Nigeria, Burundi. This is in the last few years. It's on top of large populations of refugees already from Somalia, from Democratic Republic of Congo, from Eritrea. So you have a lot of people that have been uprooted from their homes. And I think that people are starting to recognize that some of this is at the base of some of the migration challenges that we're seeing. Some of these people have been displaced for many, many years, and in addition, the resources to meet some of their basic needs are just not there. With so many crises around the world, including Syria, for example, the whole humanitarian response system has really been stretched, and resources have been stretched. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees says that they're only 50% funded in many places. In some places in Africa, they're only 25% funded. And this means a lot of basic needs are not being met. Just the opportunity for refugees to have basic shelter and food is sort of under threat. And then when you think of what else young refugees might want for themselves in their lives, the opportunity to go to school and to support themselves, you start to realize some of the factors that can be behind some of this migration. I do want to say that as a government, even in the face of these really daunting challenges, we remain absolutely committed to humanitarian assistance in Africa. The bureau that I represent programmed some $800 million last year. That was a record, and hopefully with the generosity of our Congress, we'll continue to be able to do that. But we're also investing a lot in diplomatic engagements to try to seek to end some of these conflicts that are generating such displacement in South Sudan, in Congo, in Nigeria. And we're also always looking for ways to promote solutions.
And Catherine, when you say you just came from there, you saw all this desperation and people are looking for a better life. They don't even have any opportunity to even go to school, some of them. So when you talked to governments in Africa, what are they saying? What is their perspective? What do they expect to do to help in their own capacity before they can get aid from outside?
I mean, by and large, we first have to recognize that most African governments have been incredibly generous in keeping their borders open and allowing people to find safety and sanctuary there. That's our first diplomatic objective. At the same time, with all of this media focus on Europe right now, you've heard some African leaders say publicly that what Europe is now experiencing is something that they have experienced for many, many years, contended with large numbers of people flowing across their borders, needing immediate assistance. And so I think it's quite important to emphasize that there really is an international need for responsibility sharing. This is a global crisis. It's not new in some parts of the world. It's becoming more apparent because of where people are traveling to. But the numbers of displaced people have been there, and African governments have been contending with that for some time. In addition, I think it's quite important within Africa that not only keeping borders open and not sending people back to harm, governments also have to be quite careful about maintaining the civilian nature of some of these refugee camps and not to let them become exploited by armed actors, by opposition groups who might seek to do that. But ultimately, I think what we're looking for is to support some of the more progressive policies towards hosting refugees that are emerging in Africa, but also around the world, which is essentially to see refugees as economic contributors, to allow them the opportunity to work, to cultivate land, to become self-reliant in a way that they're not a burden on the countries that are hosting them, but can contribute to them.
But most of these countries see that burden. They don't see a lot of help from outside. And probably you've heard, like in Kenya, where the president says it's too much. There are so many refugees from different countries in, say, Dadaab camp. and you've been there sometimes back, and you know how the situation is. So how does the United States help, or Europe, and how is this integrated so that the countries that are taking in so many refugees are able to survive and also give help to those refugees?
Yeah, so as I said, we programmed more than 800 million last year in humanitarian assistance, and I know that Europe is also looking at increasing the amount of money that they invest, not only in humanitarian assistance, but also development funds, and that's quite important. If donor governments, if the World Bank can work together with African governments, as I said, to see refugees as more of an economic opportunity and include them in development planning, invest development dollars in those areas, that you can find some win-win solutions. At the same time, as you said, I was there and engaging with government leaders. No matter how much is invested in areas of origin, in creating opportunities for young people, they will always seek, if they don't see those opportunities for themselves, they will always seek them elsewhere. And so I was really struck in talking to one of the Somali government officials recently. He's preparing, as are all the governments in the region, to go to an upcoming summit in Valletta with the European Union and the African Union, which is essentially building on a number of political discussions that have been held around managing irregular migration, cracking down on smuggling and trafficking, in fact, even returning economic migrants, having better systems in place for that, but now with much more of emphasis on this investment in root causes. But this Somali official was saying to me, even if we invest in the areas where people come from and create opportunities, there will be people who will want to seek those opportunities elsewhere. And so he was talking about his vision for scholarships, international scholarships for young people, for the ability to move, for jobs, labor migration. And I think that's a really important part of the dialogue, that we also need legal channels for migration.
Catherine, very quickly, tell us, does the U.S. plan to increase the number of African refugees coming into the country? Because as we see now, most of the spotlight is being shown on Syria, the Syrian refugees coming here.
We do, and in terms of durable solutions for refugees, usually the first and best option is always for them to be able to return home when there's peace in their country. We also support other solutions like local integration where possible. There are some efforts right now in Tanzania and Zambia. But resettlement to third countries is also a durable solution, and one to which the United States is committed. We will be increasing the number. We've doubled it in the last 4 years. It will be up to 25,000 next year. And so as we increase the numbers globally, we are also doing so for Africa.
Thank you so much, Catherine. We have to leave it there. Catherine, thank you. It's Catherine Wiesner, the Deputy Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration at the U.S. Department of State.